You already know the feeling. Someone says something, and your whole body answers before your mind does. Your jaw tightens. Your fingers move toward the keyboard. You start composing the reply in your head before they've even finished talking. You've done this before. You know exactly how it ends. You'll say something sharp. You'll feel briefly powerful. And then, an hour later, or a week later, you'll feel small, because you spent your energy proving a point to someone who was never trying to understand you in the first place. Maybe it's a coworker who takes credit for your work in the meeting. Maybe it's a partner who knows exactly which words will make you defend yourself. Maybe it's a friend who goes quiet the moment you succeed and loud the moment you stumble. Maybe it's just the version of you at 1 a.m. replaying an argument you already lost the moment you engaged in it. You keep showing up to fights nobody scheduled. You keep answering provocations nobody will remember making. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion, you've started to suspect the truth. You are not losing because you are weak. You are losing because you keep fighting on ground someone else chose. This is not a personality flaw. It is not something wrong with you. It is a strategic problem, and strategic problems have strategic solutions. 25 centuries ago, a general named Sun Tzu wrote a text that would outlast every empire it was written for. He was not obsessed with strength. He was obsessed with clarity, with the idea that most conflicts are decided long before the first move is made by whoever understands the terrain, and themselves most completely. His most enduring idea is simple, and almost nobody lives by it. Know yourself, and you will not be endangered in 100 contests. Not because you'll win every fight, because you'll stop entering the ones that were never yours to win. In the next few minutes, you're going to walk through 7 strategic laws, Sun Tzu's laws of withdrawal, translated out of the battlefield and into your actual life, your job, your relationships, the arguments you keep refighting in the shower 3 days later. You will learn why the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest strategist in it. You'll learn what it actually means to conserve your energy instead of just staying calm. And near the end, you'll hit the one law that changes everything before it. The moment where disappearing stops looking like defeat and starts looking like command. Stay until the end. The last law is the one that makes the other 6 actually work. Law 1. The cost of reacting here is the pattern, and you already recognize it. Someone provokes you, not always with cruelty, sometimes just with carelessness or arrogance, or a comment dropped like a coin on a table, daring you to pick it up. And you pick it up. You respond. You correct them. You explain yourself. You defend a position nobody was seriously attacking. You spend an evening or a week rehearsing the perfect comeback to a comment that the other person has already forgotten. This is the first thing Sun Tzu understood about conflict that almost no one internalizes. Every reaction has a cost, and the cost is paid whether you win the exchange or not. He wrote about war the way an accountant writes about money. Every campaign drains the treasury. Every prolonged engagement weakens the side that started it, even if that side eventually claims victory. A war won too expensively is not a victory. It is a slower kind of loss. You do this with your own nervous system every day. Every time you respond to a provocation that didn't deserve a response, you are funding a campaign that gains you nothing. You didn't change the other person's mind. You didn't protect your reputation. You spent hours, sometimes days, of attention, sleep, and emotional bandwidth on a battle that existed only because you agreed to show up to it. Here is the part that stings a little. The other person often isn't even fighting you. They said one careless thing and moved on with their day. You are the only one still in the war. Modern psychology has a name for a piece of this. Researchers who study emotional regulation have found that suppressing a reaction outright tends to backfire. It takes energy and often leaks out elsewhere. But reappraising a situation, consciously reframing what it means before you respond, measurably lowers the physiological cost of the moment. The people who recover fastest from provocation are not the ones who feel nothing. They are the ones who decide, quickly and deliberately, what the moment is actually worth before committing resources to it. This is a strategic skill, not a personality trait. It can be trained the way a general trains scouts to give an honest report before the battle plan is drawn. Consider a composite figure. Call him Daniel. Daniel ran a small design studio, and there was a client who emailed constantly, always slightly condescending, always implying that Daniel's team wasn't quite delivering. For months, Daniel answered every email the same night, defending each decision in detail, staying up late crafting responses that were polite on the surface and exhausted underneath. He was winning every individual exchange. His logic was airtight and losing the war. He was drained. His actual work suffered. The client, meanwhile, barely noticed the effort. He simply kept prodding. Because prodding cost him nothing and cost Daniel everything. The turn came when Daniel stopped answering the same night. He started waiting, not out of spite, out of arithmetic. He asked himself, before responding, does this require my energy, or does it just require my presence? Most of the time, it required neither. A short, calm reply, sent 2 days later instead of 2 hours later, ended more of these exchanges than any brilliant rebuttal ever had. The client's provocations were never really about winning an argument. They were testing whether Daniel would spend himself. Once he stopped spending, the testing stopped too. This is law 1. Not every provocation is a battle, and every battle you didn't need to fight is a resource you can't get back. The question is never, can I win this exchange? The question is, what does winning this exchange actually cost me, and is it worth the price? Most of the time, when you actually do the math, it isn't. There is a reason this is the first law and not a minor footnote. Everything else in this practice depends on you having energy left to spend on it. A general who has bled his army dry on minor skirmishes has nothing left when the real campaign arrives. You are doing the same thing every time you treat a passing comment as a crisis worth full deployment. The strategic reserve you need for the moments that actually matter, the ones involving your career, your closest relationships, your own sense of direction, gets quietly spent on people and comments that were never going to matter by next month. Ask yourself, honestly, how many of last year's unforgivable provocations you can even recall in detail today. Most of them have dissolved. What hasn't dissolved is the residue of how you spent yourself responding to them. The sleep lost, the trust damaged by an overreaction, the reputation for being easily triggered that outlived the incident that caused it by years. The provocation fades. The cost of your reaction to it often doesn't. This doesn't mean becoming numb. It means becoming selective. A general still fights, but only the wars worth the treasury it costs to fight them. You are allowed to still feel the sting of a slight. Feeling it and paying for it are two separate decisions, and the second one is always yours to make. Law 2. Reading the ground you're actually on. Sun Tzu spent enormous attention on terrain. Not because ground itself is interesting, but because misreading the ground you're standing on is how you lose before the fight even starts. He insisted that a commander study the actual conditions in front of them, the weather, the supply lines, the morale of the troops, the shape of the land, not the battle they imagined, the one they were actually in. Here is where most people quietly sabotage themselves. You don't respond to your actual circumstances. You respond to a story about your circumstances, one built from fear, old wounds, and assumption layered over the real situation like fog over a valley. Someone doesn't reply to your text for 6 hours, and by hour 3 you've decided they're angry with you, or losing interest, or talking about you behind your back. None of this is confirmed. All of it is terrain you invented. And then you make decisions, anxious, defensive, overcorrecting decisions, based on ground that doesn't exist. Sun Tzu's insight cuts through this cleanly. Know the ground, or lose regardless of your skill. A brilliant strategist on the wrong map still marches his army into a swamp. The discipline here is uncomfortable because it asks you to separate two things your mind wants to merge: what actually happened and what you're afraid it means. What actually happened is often small. A delayed reply, a raised eyebrow, a comment made in a rough tone during someone else's bad day. What it means, in your head, has often already escalated into rejection, betrayal, or humiliation before a single fact has confirmed any of it. Cognitive behavioral research calls this cluster of moves catastrophizing and mind reading, assuming you know what others think, assuming the worst outcome is the likely one. It's one of the most common distortions therapists work to correct, precisely because it's so automatic and so convincing from the inside. It doesn't feel like a distortion in the moment. It feels like insight. That's what makes it dangerous. Bad terrain always looks solid until you put weight on it. Take a composite figure. A woman named Priya, mid-career, ambitious, sharp. Her manager began scheduling one-on-ones less frequently. Priya's mind went straight to the worst map available. She's being managed out. She's fallen out of favor. There's a plan forming without her. She spent 2 weeks in a low simmer of anxiety, overperforming out of fear, staying late, sending extra updates nobody asked for. All strategic moves made on a battlefield that existed only in her head. The actual terrain, when she finally asked directly, was almost embarrassingly simple. Her manager was overwhelmed with a reorg above his own pay grade and had cut back one-on-ones with everyone. Not just her. Priya had fought an entire campaign against an enemy that was never there. And, in doing so, she'd exhausted resources, sleep, focus, goodwill toward her own team. She couldn't easily get back. This is law 2. Before you respond to anything, ask what you actually know. Separate from what you're afraid of. Reading the ground clearly is not optimism, and it is not pessimism. It is accuracy. And accuracy, more often than courage, is what decides whether your next move helps you or costs you. You cannot out-strategize a battlefield you've imagined instead of studied. There is a simple discipline that separates people who read terrain well from people who don't. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. It is the willingness to sit with an unconfirmed fact for a while, instead of rushing to fill the gap with the worst available story. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. Your mind treats an unanswered question the way a body treats hunger, as something to resolve immediately, by any means necessary, even a false one. A confirmed bad answer feels better to your nervous system than an honest "I don't know yet." This is precisely the weakness Sun Tzu warned against when he insisted on scouts, on verified intelligence, on never advancing based on assumption alone. The strategist's version of a scout in your life is simple and almost embarrassingly available. Ask. Ask the direct question instead of building an elaborate internal case from a raised eyebrow or a slow reply. Wait for information instead of manufacturing it. This feels like vulnerability the first few times you try it, admitting you don't already know what someone meant. It is, in fact, the opposite. Guessing and reacting to the guess is the vulnerable move, because it hands your emotional state over to a fiction you invented yourself. There's a second layer to reading terrain correctly, and it's this: the ground changes. What was true about a relationship, a job, or a conflict 6 months ago is not automatically true today. Sun Tzu warned generals against fighting yesterday's war on today's field. Conditions shift, and a strategist who keeps referencing an old map, even an accurate one, will misjudge the present. If you keep responding to a coworker as though they're still the person who slighted you 2 years ago, you're not reading the ground. You're refighting a battle that technically ended. Reading terrain, done well, is a form of respect toward the situation and toward yourself. It refuses to let fear write the report before the facts arrive. Law 3. Not revealing your hand there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from explaining yourself to someone who is never going to be convinced. You feel it after a long message you sent trying to clarify your intentions to someone who'd already decided how to see you. You feel it after justifying a decision 3 different ways to someone who just wanted a reaction, not a reason. You feel it in the small, quiet defeat of realizing that no amount of explanation will change a mind that isn't actually open. It will only hand that person more material to work with. Sun Tzu built an entire philosophy around this instinct. Though he wasn't talking about emotional over-explaining, he was talking about concealment. All warfare, he said, is based on deception. Appear weak when you are strong. Appear strong when you are weak. And above all, never let the other side read your full position. Translated inward, this has nothing to do with lying to people or manipulating them. It has to do with something much more personal, not handing your inner state, your doubts, your insecurities, your triggers, to everyone who asks for them, especially the people who ask in bad faith. You do not owe every provocation a transparent window into your emotional interior. Explaining yourself to someone who is not operating in good faith doesn't build understanding. It builds a map they can use against you later. Every insecurity you reveal under pressure becomes a lever. Every over-explanation becomes evidence that you can be pushed into performing your own defense on command. This is the discipline of the closed hand. Not dishonesty, but restraint. You can be honest without being exposed. You can hold a boundary without narrating every emotion behind it. Silence, used correctly, is not avoidance. It is information control. It is choosing what the world gets to see of your internal machinery rather than broadcasting it under duress. Negotiation research backs this up in a very practical way. Parties who reveal too much of their position too early, their true limits, their anxieties, their deadline pressure, consistently negotiate worse outcomes than those who stay composed and let the other side reveal first. The person who explains the most, under pressure, is usually the one giving up the most leverage, even when they believe they're just being honest. Picture a composite man, Marcus, a mid-level manager whose new director had a habit of needling him in meetings, small jabs about his department's performance, delivered with a smile, always in front of others. For months, Marcus responded exactly as invited, defending his numbers point by point, explaining context, justifying decisions, occasionally raising his voice slightly at the injustice of it. Every explanation gave the director new territory to work with. Marcus had, without realizing it, handed over a running list of exactly which comments got under his skin. The shift wasn't dramatic. Marcus simply stopped narrating his defense in real time. When needled, he'd give a short, flat acknowledgement, "We'll look at that," and move the meeting forward. No lengthy justification, no visible discomfort to reward. Within weeks, the needling lost its function. It wasn't landing anywhere anymore, because Marcus had stopped handing over the wiring diagram of his own reactions. This is Law 3. You are not required to explain yourself to people who are using your explanations as ammunition. Not revealing your hand is not deceit. It is the discipline of deciding deliberately what parts of your inner life are available for other people to touch. There's a distinction worth holding on to here, because it's easy to confuse restraint with dishonesty, and they are not the same thing. Dishonesty is telling someone something false. Restraint is simply declining to narrate everything true. You can answer a question completely and still choose not to volunteer every fear, doubt, or insecurity sitting behind your answer. Sun Tzu never asked his generals to lie about their position to their own allies, only to control, carefully, what an adversary was permitted to see. The same applies here. The people who have earned your full transparency, the ones who've shown up for you consistently, who argue with you in good faith, who want to understand rather than exploit, deserve it. The ones who only ever use what you reveal as a weapon have not earned the same access, no matter how insistently they demand it. Notice, too, how often the demand for total honesty comes precisely from people least entitled to it. A provocateur who says, "Just tell me how you really feel," in the middle of a bad faith exchange is rarely asking out of genuine curiosity. They're asking for material. Sun Tzu's closed hand isn't cowardice in that moment. It's recognizing an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as an invitation to connect. This law also applies to yourself before it applies to anyone else. Part of not revealing your hand is refusing to over-explain your choices even in your own head, replaying justifications for a decision that needed none. The habit of mentally rehearsing your defense to an argument that hasn't happened yet is its own form of exposure. It wears a groove of anxiety into your thinking before anyone has even attacked. A closed hand starts with a quiet mind, not just a quiet mouth. Law 4. The enemy inside the gate. Every strategist eventually has to confront an uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous opponent in any conflict is rarely the person standing across from you. Sun Tzu understood war as fundamentally a test of discipline before it was a test of force. An army that could be provoked into rushing forward, exhausted by chasing a retreating enemy, or drawn into fighting on unfavorable ground out of pride, that army would lose regardless of its size. The other side didn't need to be stronger. They just needed to be more patient than your impulses. This is the enemy within, not the rival, not the difficult coworker, not the partner who knows which buttons to press. The real opponent is your own undisciplined urgency, the part of you that mistakes speed for strength and reaction for control. You already know this instinct. It is the version of you that fires off the email at 11 p.m. It is the version of you that just wants to say one more thing after the argument has already ended. It is the version of you that keeps checking whether they've seen the message, whether they've responded, whether the silence means what you fear it means. That version of you is not protecting your interests. It is the breach in the wall. Everyone who wants to provoke you is, whether they know it or not, aiming for exactly this. The part of you that cannot tolerate an unresolved moment and will spend any amount of energy to resolve it prematurely. Sun Tzu's remedy was not suppression. It was command, the same relationship a skilled rider has with a powerful horse. You don't destroy the impulse, you govern it. The general who cannot govern his own anger, Sun Tzu warned, will be provoked into disaster by an enemy who has nothing to lose by provoking him. There's a well-known behavioral finding that echoes this almost exactly. Decision-making quality drops measurably when people are emotionally activated and under time pressure. The more urgent something feels, the less reliable your judgment about it typically is in that exact moment. Urgency is not a reliable signal of importance. It is often just a signal of unmanaged activation. Consider a composite woman, Elena, a therapist by training, ironically prone to exactly this pattern in her personal life. Her sister had a habit of sending long, accusatory texts late at night, then going quiet for days. For years, Elena answered immediately, matching the intensity, trying to resolve everything in a single, exhausting exchange at midnight. Nothing was ever actually resolved. It just repeated, month after month, each cycle draining her more than the last. What changed wasn't the sister. It was Elena's relationship to her own urgency. She began waiting, not indefinitely, not coldly, but deliberately, until morning, until she was regulated, before responding to anything sent in that particular tone. The messages that had felt like 5 alarm emergencies at 11 p.m. often looked, by 9 a.m., like something that needed one calm sentence, not 4 paragraphs of defense. The enemy inside the gate had been the urgency itself, not her sister. This is Law 4. Before you can out-strategize anyone else, you have to out-govern yourself. The provocateur is only ever half the equation. The other half is whichever part of you agrees to be provoked. It helps to notice what urgency actually feels like in your body, because it has a signature, and once you can name it, you can catch it earlier. A tightening in the chest, a pull toward the phone, a sentence forming in your mind that starts with "I need to tell them right now." None of these sensations are evidence that the moment requires immediate action. They are evidence that your nervous system has been activated, which is a different thing entirely, and one that resolves on its own, usually within minutes, if you simply decline to act on it immediately. Sun Tzu's armies used a version of this same discipline at scale, a commander who could hold a position and wait, even while goaded, even while the enemy paraded insults in front of the walls, often won simply by outlasting the other side's patience. The enemy's whole strategy sometimes depended entirely on provoking a premature charge. Refuse the charge, and the provocation has nothing left to do but exhaust itself. There is a useful test you can apply in the heat of the moment, almost like a scout's checklist. Will this matter in a week? Will this matter tomorrow morning? Is there any real cost to waiting an hour before I respond? Almost every emergency that provokes an immediate reaction fails this test completely. The email can wait until morning. The comment can go unanswered until you've had a chance to actually think, rather than simply discharge tension in the direction of another person. Governing the enemy within is not about becoming passive. Elena, in the earlier example, did not become someone who avoided conflict with her sister. She became someone who chose the timing of that conflict deliberately, instead of letting her own urgency choose it for her. That is the whole distinction. The undisciplined self reacts on demand, whenever poked. The governed self decides when and whether a reaction is actually warranted, and that decision alone changes almost everything about how the conflict unfolds afterward. Law 5, winning before the fight starts there, is a line that runs through the entire philosophy of Sun Tzu, and it is this: the skilled strategist wins before the battle is fought. Not through some mystical foresight, but through preparation so thorough that by the time conflict arrives, the outcome is already mostly decided. This is almost the opposite of how you've likely been taught to think about winning. Most people picture victory as something that happens in the moment, the sharp comeback, the decisive confrontation, the argument won on the spot. Sun Tzu's version of victory looks almost boring by comparison. It happens quietly, beforehand, in the discipline you built long before anyone provoked you. Positioning is everything. A general who has secured supply lines, trained troops, and chosen advantageous ground doesn't need brilliance in the moment of battle. The groundwork has already tilted the outcome in his favor. A general who hasn't done this work is gambling, no matter how clever his tactics look in the moment. Translate this inward, and the implication is uncomfortable but useful. Most of your in-the-moment losses were actually decided earlier, in how rested you were, how clear your boundaries already were, how much of your self-worth you'd quietly outsourced to the outcome of that specific interaction. You don't lose an argument at 9 p.m. because you weren't clever enough. You lose it because you walked in exhausted, underslept, emotionally invested in being seen as right, with no boundary already established before the conversation started. This reframes preparation as the actual battlefield. The daily discipline, sleep, clear boundaries stated in advance, decisions about what you will and won't engage with, made calmly, before you're under pressure. This is where the war is actually won or lost. By the time the provocation arrives, you are either positioned to withstand it or you aren't. And very little you say in the moment will fully compensate for poor positioning beforehand. There's a well-documented pattern in behavioral science sometimes called decision fatigue. The quality of your choices degrades over the course of a day as willpower and cognitive resources are depleted. The version of you making decisions at the end of an exhausting day is measurably not the same strategist as the version of you fresh in the morning. Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly. It's simply the psychological equivalent of sending exhausted troops into a fight you could have avoided by resting them first. Picture a composite man, Tobias, who ran a small business and had one investor who used late afternoon calls, always after Tobias's energy was already spent, to renegotiate terms that had supposedly been settled. Every time, Tobias found himself agreeing to small concessions he'd regret by morning, not because the investor's arguments were strong, but because Tobias had nothing left to resist with by 4 p.m. The fix wasn't a better argument, it was better positioning. Tobias began insisting all substantive calls happen before noon, when he was rested and clear-headed, and he began writing down, in advance, the terms he would not move on, decided calmly, days before any pressure arrived. The investor's tactics didn't change. Tobias's terrain did. He stopped losing in the moment because he'd already secured the ground beforehand. This is Law 5. The fight you're worried about tonight was mostly decided last week by how you prepared, what boundaries you set in calm moments, and how much of your composure you preserved before the pressure ever arrived. Win the positioning, and most confrontations become almost anticlimactic by the time they happen. Positioning also means something quieter and less visible than boundaries and sleep. It means the story you carry about your own worth on an ordinary Tuesday, long before anyone tests it. A person who walks into a difficult conversation already uncertain about their own value will read every ambiguous comment as confirmation of that uncertainty. A person who has done the quiet work of establishing their own sense of standing, independent of any single interaction, brings a kind of ballast into the room that has nothing to do with cleverness in the moment. Sun Tzu called a secure position one, the enemy cannot shake regardless of what they try. The most secure position you can build is simply not needing this particular conversation to go a certain way in order to feel intact afterward. This is also why the strongest strategists rarely look like they're doing much in the moment of conflict itself. Their calm isn't produced on the spot. It's the visible result of groundwork laid well before the provocation arrived. What looks like effortless composure under pressure is, almost without exception, the residue of preparation nobody saw. The sleep protected, the boundary decided on a calm afternoon, the identity that doesn't depend on winning this specific exchange. You are not watching someone improvise strength. You are watching someone spend interest on a deposit made long before the argument began. The uncomfortable implication is that if you keep losing the same kind of confrontation, in the same kind of pattern, the fix is rarely a sharper line delivered in the moment. It's almost always upstream, in the terms you haven't set, the rest you haven't protected, or the worth you haven't yet decided, doesn't depend on this outcome. Law 6, the strength of disappearing here, is the moment everything before this has been building toward. And it is also the hardest one to actually live by, because it goes against nearly every instinct your ego has ever trained. Sun Tzu wrote something that sounds almost paradoxical until you sit with it. The supreme skill is not winning 100 battles. The supreme skill is subduing the opponent without ever fighting at all, not through cowardice, through a kind of strategic superiority so complete that combat becomes unnecessary. This is the law of disappearing, and it is the turning point of everything you've learned so far, because it demands the one thing your instincts will fight you on hardest: the willingness to walk away from a fight you could probably win, because winning it would still cost you more than it's worth. Here is the trap. Laid bare, someone provokes you, publicly, cleverly, in a way clearly designed to make you respond. And in that moment, every impulse in your body screams that silence equals defeat. That walking away means they get away with it. That if you don't respond, they win, and everyone watching will think less of you. This feeling is almost never accurate, and it is precisely the feeling Sun Tzu spent his whole philosophy training a general to distrust. Because here is what actually happens when you disappear from a fight designed to bait you. You remove the only thing the provocation needed to succeed: your participation. A provocation with no audience response is not a victory for the provocateur. It's a wasted move. It reveals more about their need to provoke than it does about your supposed weakness. And the people watching who actually matter, the ones with judgment worth having, read composed non-engagement as strength, almost every time, even when it doesn't feel that way to you in the moment. This is the hardest thing you will do in this entire practice. Stay silent when everything in you wants to answer. Walk away from a public jab and let it sit there, unanswered, in front of people, trusting that your restraint says more than your rebuttal ever could. Watch someone try to bait you into a reaction, and instead of reacting, simply not be there. Not emotionally, not energetically. Disengage so completely that there is nothing left for them to push against. This is not avoidance. Avoidance is what you do out of fear, to escape discomfort permanently, never returning to handle what needs handling. This is different. This is a general withdrawing troops from unfavorable ground, not because he's afraid of the enemy, but because he refuses to fight a battle designed entirely by someone else, on terms that serve them and not him. He is not gone. He has simply decided the timing, the ground, and the terms will be his to choose, not theirs. Consider a composite woman, Aisha, a partner at a firm, publicly undermined in a meeting by a colleague who made a habit of subtly discrediting her ideas in front of clients. Never quite crossing a line sharp enough to name directly, always just deniable enough to make a direct confrontation look petty. For a long time, Aisha did what almost anyone would do. She pushed back in the moment, defended herself point by point, tried to win each individual exchange in front of the room. Every time, she came across, despite being right, as slightly defensive, slightly reactive, exactly the frame her colleague was quietly building around her. The turn came in a meeting where the same colleague made a familiar jab, clearly baiting a reaction in front of an important client. And Aisha, for the first time, did nothing. No defense, no correction. She simply let a beat of silence pass, gave a small, unbothered nod, and redirected the conversation back to the actual agenda as if the jab hadn't landed at all, because in the way that mattered, it hadn't. The client noticed. Not the jab, the composure. Aisha's colleague, who had built an entire pattern around provoking a reaction, suddenly had nothing to work with. No defensiveness to point to. No emotional material to reframe as unprofessionalism. He had made his move on a battlefield that had simply declined to exist. Over the following months, without a single direct confrontation, his provocations lost their power, because a provocation that gets no reaction eventually stops being worth making. This is the highest stakes version of everything you've practiced so far. Not walking away out of weakness. Walking away is the most disciplined move available. Refusing a fight someone else designed, on ground someone else chose, for stakes that were never actually yours. This is not disappearing because you have nothing left. This is disappearing because you have decided with total clarity that this particular battlefield does not deserve you. It will not feel like strength while you're doing it. It will feel, for a moment, like surrender. This is the illusion Sun Tzu spent his entire life training generals to see through. The strongest move rarely announces itself as strength in the moment it's made. It only reveals itself as strength afterward, in the quiet, when the provocation has nowhere left to go, and you are still standing exactly where you chose to stand. This is the moment where everything you've practiced up to now gets tested at once, and it will likely be the hardest thing this whole practice asks of you. Every one of the earlier laws was preparation for exactly this instant. The instant where withdrawing looks, to everyone watching, indistinguishable from losing. Your reputation feels like it's on the line. Your pride is screaming that silence will be read as guilt, or weakness, or confirmation of whatever the provocation implied. This is precisely the psychological pressure point Sun Tzu identified as the true test of a commander, not skill in open combat, but the discipline to hold a position that looks, from the outside, like retreat. while knowing internally that it is the opposite. Understand clearly what you are actually risking by disappearing versus what you are risking by engaging. If you engage, you risk confirming exactly the frame the provocation was designed to build, that you're reactive, that you can be baited, that your composure has a price someone else gets to set. If you disappear, you risk, at most, a temporary and usually inaccurate impression that you had nothing to say. That impression rarely survives contact with time. What survives instead is the memory of someone who didn't take the bait, and in most rooms, among most people whose opinion is actually worth having, that memory reads as strength long after the specific provocation is forgotten. There is also a private cost to staying in the fight that nobody else can see, and it matters more than the public one. Every time you take the bait, you confirm to yourself, quietly, that you don't yet trust your own composure enough to let a provocation pass unanswered. Every time you don't take it, you build a different kind of evidence, proof, accumulated one instance at a time. That you can hold your ground without needing the world's agreement in that exact moment. This private evidence compounds. It is, in the truest sense, the actual war being fought here. Not against the person provoking you, but against your own doubt about whether you can survive an unresolved moment without acting to resolve it. None of this means every conflict should be avoided or every confrontation dodged. There is a difference between disappearing from a fight designed to bait you and abandoning a conversation that genuinely needs to happen, on your own terms, at your own timing. Sun Tzu never told his generals to avoid all combat. He told them to refuse combat on ground and terms chosen entirely by the enemy. If a conversation truly needs to happen, have it, on ground you've chosen, at a time you've chosen, in a tone you've chosen. What you are refusing here is not resolution. It is being summoned into a fight on someone else's schedule, designed to serve someone else's need for a reaction. Law 7. The discipline that remains after the withdrawal. Something changes, not in the world around you. At first, but in you. Sun Tzu understood that the final measure of a strategist was not how many battles they'd won, but how little they needed to fight at all. The truly formidable position is the one so clearly secured that almost nobody bothers testing it. Not because you've become untouchable through force. Because you've become predictable in exactly one way, you no longer hand your composure over on demand. This is the quiet power that remains after everything else in this practice has been applied. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like steadiness. It looks like someone who, when provoked, simply doesn't provide the reaction the provocation was fishing for. Not once, not as a special effort, but as a baseline. And baselines, over time, become reputations. People stop testing ground that never gives way. This is the shape of formlessness Sun Tzu described near the end of his own writing. Water taking the shape of whatever contains it, never rigid, never forcing a fixed position, and yet, in its patience, capable of wearing down anything rigid that stands against it. You are not trying to become hard, you are trying to become clear, so clear about your own terrain, your own terms, your own timing, that very little can catch you off guard anymore. None of this makes you invulnerable to provocation. People will still say careless things. Circumstances will still occasionally overwhelm your preparation. But the difference now is that you have a practice, not just a hope. When something lands, you have a first move that isn't reaction. Check the terrain before you respond to the story about it. Ask what this actually costs before you spend yourself on it. Decide what stays behind the closed hand and what doesn't need explaining. Notice which part of you is asking to be provoked and decline the invitation. Prepare on calm ground long before the pressure arrives. And when the fight is designed for you to lose by winning it, disappear from it entirely and let your absence do what no argument could. This is not coldness. It is not detachment from people who matter to you. It is detachment from the compulsion to prove something to people who were never going to give you a fair hearing anyway. You can still love people fiercely, still show up for the relationships that deserve your full presence, while refusing to spend that same presence on every provocation that demands it. The people around you will notice something shift, even if they can't name it. You will stop being easy to bait. You will stop over-explaining to people who were never listening. You will start finishing conversations you used to prolong out of anxiety, and start walking away from conflicts you used to enter out of habit. Your energy will start going toward the handful of things and people that actually deserve it, instead of leaking out through 100 small skirmishes nobody remembers a week later. This is what Sun Tzu meant by winning without fighting. Not because conflict disappears from your life. It doesn't. But because you stop handing out victories for free to anyone willing to provoke you into spending yourself. You become quieter, not because you have less to say, but because you've stopped needing to prove you could say it. There is a particular kind of respect this discipline earns over time, and it's worth naming because it's different from the respect that comes from winning arguments. People come to trust someone who doesn't need to win every exchange in the room, precisely because that person's calm doesn't feel performed. It feels structural, like something built into how they operate, rather than something switched on for an audience. This is a slower reputation to build than the one you get from a sharp comeback, but it is far more durable. Because it doesn't depend on being clever in any single moment. It depends only on consistency, applied quietly, over a long stretch of ordinary days. This also changes your relationship to the people who used to be able to provoke you easily, not because you've decided to dislike them or write them off, but because their access to your composure has simply narrowed. They can still say the same things they always said. What's changed is what those things are able to do once they land. A provocation aimed at someone with no defended terrain lands like a blow. The same provocation aimed at someone who has done this work lands more like weather, noted, sometimes even a little sad on their behalf, and then released. Because you no longer need it to mean anything about you. None of this arrives all at once. You will have days where the old pattern reasserts itself, where you take the bait anyway, where you explain yourself to someone who was never going to listen. This is not failure. It is simply evidence that discipline, like anything else worth having, is practiced rather than installed. Sun Tzu himself never claimed a general became invincible. He claimed only that preparation, clarity, and self-command made defeat far less likely and made recovery from any single setback far faster. That is the standard worth holding yourself to here, not perfection, but a steadily shrinking gap between provocation and composed response. Resolution and integration. Go back to the moment you started with, the provocation that made your body answer before your mind did. The comment. The slight. The silence you filled with your worst assumptions. Notice something different now. That moment hasn't lost its sting, exactly, but it has lost its authority over you. You now have somewhere to put it. You can ask what it actually costs to respond, and let that number, not your ego, decide your next move. You can check whether you're standing on real ground or a story you built out of fear. You can hold your position without narrating every feeling behind it. You can recognize the part of you that wants to fire back at midnight and simply decline to let it drive. And in the moments that matter most, the public jab, the calculated provocation, the fight built entirely on the assumption that you'll show up to it, you now have the hardest and most powerful option available to you. You can disappear. Not out of weakness, out of command. You can decide with total clarity that this is not your battlefield, that these are not your terms, and that your silence will say more than your defense ever could. This is not a performance you put on for other people. Nobody needs to know you're practicing this. There is no announcement, no explanation required, no need to tell anyone that you've decided not to engage. The whole point is that it happens quietly, inside you, and the results simply arrive on their own. Fewer battles you didn't need, more energy for the ones that actually matter, a steadiness that other people start to notice without being able to name it. You will still feel provoked sometimes. That doesn't mean the practice failed. It means you're paying attention. The measure of progress isn't the absence of the impulse to react. It's the growing space between the impulse and whatever you choose to do next. That space is where all of this actually lives. Not in never being tempted to fight. In choosing, deliberately, again and again, not to spend yourself on fights that were never going to make you stronger. This is quiet power, and it looks almost nothing like what you probably imagined strength to look like when you started. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't require the last word, the sharpest comeback, or the public vindication you used to think you needed in order to feel like you'd won. It looks, from the outside, almost like nothing happened at all, but you'll know. You'll know in the moments you used to lose sleep over that now barely register. You'll know in the arguments you no longer enter, the explanations you no longer give to people who were never listening, the provocations that used to own your evening and now simply pass through you like weather, noted and released. This is what Sun Tzu meant when he said the skilled strategist wins before the battle begins. He wasn't describing a trick. He was describing a way of being, someone so clear about their own terrain, their own worth, and their own timing that most fights simply stop finding traction against them. That is available to you. Not someday, not after some dramatic transformation. Starting with the next provocation that arrives, however small, however soon. You do not have to fight everything that invites you to. You do not have to explain yourself to everyone who demands it. You do not have to be present for every battle that has your name attached to it. Think, for a moment, about what actually changes in a life organized this way. Not a dramatic reversal of fortune. Something quieter and, in the long run, more valuable. The slow disappearance of a category of suffering that used to feel unavoidable. The suffering of being pulled into other people's timing, other people's terms, other people's bad faith invitations to prove yourself. That category of suffering was never actually mandatory. It only felt that way because no one had ever handed you a framework for declining it. You have one now. None of the 7 laws asks you to become someone else. They ask you to become more precisely yourself, clearer about what's actually happening around you, more careful about what you spend your composure on, less willing to hand your inner life to people who've done nothing to earn it. That is not a smaller way of moving through the world. It is, if anything, a far larger one, because it frees up everything you use to spend on skirmishes for the handful of people and pursuits that were always worth the investment. Sometimes the strongest move you have is simply not to be there. If something in this landed, if you recognized yourself in the fights you kept re-entering, the explanations nobody deserved, the silence you filled with your own worst fears, you're not alone in learning this the slow way. Most of us do. Consider this channel a place to keep practicing it together, one law at a time, one provocation at a time, one quiet withdrawal at a time. Subscribe if you want to keep training this with us. Come back for the next one when you're ready. There is no rush here. That's rather the point. Because in the end, the fight you thought you had to win was never the one worth having. The strongest move was always to disappear.